She was the only daughter of a billionaire. At 9, she was diagnosed with something much worse than an illness: absolute abandonment. Doctors couldn't help because no one knew she was missing. Her father, a powerful and wealthy man, tried everything money could buy when he finally discovered the truth. But in the end, it wasn't a lawyer or a detective who provided the crucial clue. It was a homeless woman living in the city's shadows. What this woman revealed, asking for nothing in return and expecting no recognition, brought the father to his knees on the sidewalk. She risked her own credibility to save a child she barely knew. And when the world discovered the full story, nothing was ever the same again. This is the true story of how love, when it is real, doesn't need shared blood, only courage. And sometimes the greatest miracles come from the most unexpected hearts, from those society has forgotten, but who have never forgotten their own humanity. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching from. We love to know. Rafael Mendez stopped the armored car in front of the abandoned square without knowing exactly why. It was almost 10 at night, and this wasn't his usual route between the office and his penthouse in Itaim Bibi. Perhaps it was the exhaustion from 16 straight hours of virtual meetings with Asian investors, or maybe something deeper that his rational mind refused to name. Through the tinted glass, he saw a small group of dirty children sitting in a circle under a flickering streetlight. In the center, a girl was holding what looked like a book, and her voice, though muffled by the distance and the glass, carried a strange clarity. Rafael felt his heart accelerate for no apparent reason, the kind of visceral restlessness that successful executives learn to ignore, but that never completely disappears. He opened the car door, and the driver immediately asked if everything was all right, if he should call for security. Rafael gestured no with his hand and got out, his Italian shoes touching the uneven sidewalk for the first time in months, perhaps years. The smell of the street hit his nostrils, a mixture of sewage, reheated food from a nearby cart, and that indefinable odor of old urban concrete. He walked slowly toward the group, and as he got closer, the girl's voice became clearer. She was reading aloud with dramatic pauses, bringing each word to life as if it were the most important thing in the world. The other children listened in absolute silence, hypnotized, some with their lips moving as they tried to follow the words they couldn't decipher on their own. Rafael stopped 3 meters away, hidden by the shadow of a scraggly tree, and finally got a full view of the scene. The girl who was reading couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. She was filthy, with torn clothes that had once been of good quality, and hair cut unevenly, as if she had done it herself with dull scissors. Her bare feet had cuts and calluses that told stories of weeks on the streets. But it was the book in her hands that made Rafael freeze completely, a worn-out children's edition of The Little Prince, with the cover partially torn, revealing pages yellowed by time. He knew that book, not just the title, but that specific copy, the exact edition he had bought in a French bookstore during his honeymoon with his wife years ago. And the prince realized he had left his rose all alone. The girl read in a voice that pierced Rafael's chest like a sharp blade. He had traveled to distant planets, met kings and conceited men, but he forgot that the only thing that truly mattered was waiting for him at home. The other children sighed in unison, completely absorbed. One of them, a boy who couldn't have been more than 7, asked, "Teacher Soso, is the prince going to go back to the rose?" The girl smiled, and it was that smile, though broken and tired, that made Rafael's legs nearly give way. He knew that smile. He had seen it 1,000 times before. It had been the reason he stayed alive after his wife died. How could a father who built a technology empire valued at billions of reais lose the only thing that truly mattered without even realizing it? Rafael swallowed hard as the question echoed in his mind like a silent alarm. he had been turning off for months. The streetlight illuminated the girl's face as she turned the page, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes met his in the shadows. They were his late wife's eyes, that exact shade of grey-green that changed depending on the light, with the same intensity that could melt any defense. Raphael took a step forward instinctively, and the girl got startled, snapping the book shut and clutching it to her chest as if it were the last valuable thing she had left in the world. The other children stood up quickly, ready to flee, but the girl remained seated, staring at Raphael with a mixture of fear and something else, recognition. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." Raphael heard his own voice come out hoarse, unrecognizable. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace, but his eyes couldn't stray from the girl's face. There was something terribly familiar in her features, even under the layer of dirt and exhaustion. The shape of her forehead, the curve of her nose, the way she tilted her head slightly to the side when she was scared, exactly like Sophia used to do when she was little, when she had nightmares and would come into his room in the middle of the night. But it couldn't be. His brain insisted on the cold logic of facts. Sophia had been safe at her boarding school in Campos do Jordão for almost 2 months, studying at one of the best institutions in the country. Beatriz had shown him the documents, had explained everything, had sent weekly reports on Sophia's exceptional progress. "Are you going to call the police?" the girl asked in a small voice that contrasted with the authority with which she had been reading moments before. Raphael shook his head, unable to form words. The other children began to relax slightly, but kept a safe distance, ready to scatter at the slightest sign of danger. The girl continued, "We're not doing anything wrong. I was just teaching them to read. We're not asking for money or bothering anyone." There was a fierce dignity in those words, a refusal to be seen as a victim, even when everything about her situation screamed vulnerability. Raphael felt something break inside him, fine but deep crack in the armor he had built over the last 3 years since his wife died. "What's your name?" Raphael managed to ask, taking another cautious step. The girl hesitated, her fingers tightening on the book. The other children looked to her for guidance. She was clearly the leader of this unlikely little group. "They call me Teacher So-So," she finally replied, and Raphael felt his heart stop completely. So-So was the nickname he used for Sophia when she was a baby, an affectionate version born from her first attempts to say her own name. Only he and his wife had ever called their daughter that, and after her death, Raphael had never used the nickname again, because it hurt too much, because it brought back memories of when they were a complete family. He taught machines how to think, created artificial intelligence algorithms that revolutionized entire markets, but he had forgotten to listen to the heart of the one person who needed him to survive. Standing there, in an abandoned square, lit only by a faulty streetlight, Rafael Mendes began to feel the crushing weight of a possibility his brain still refused to fully accept, but that his heart already recognized with devastating clarity. The girl who taught other children to read using a book from his honeymoon, who answered to a nickname only his family knew, who had eyes identical to his late wife's and gestured exactly like his daughter Sophia. This girl wasn't just some stranger who had stirred his momentary compassion. That girl, dirty and barefoot, under a flickering streetlight on the outskirts of São Paulo, was Sophia, his only daughter, the child he believed was safe in an elite boarding school, while, in reality, she had been surviving on the streets for 2 months, teaching literacy to other abandoned children. 2.5 months before that night in the square, Rafael Mendes was exactly where he had been for the past 3 years, in a meeting room. This time, it was the 20th floor of the Tech Vision office in Vila Olímpia, with a panoramic view of São Paulo's organized chaos as he presented record-breaking quarterly numbers to American investors. His artificial intelligence company had become synonymous with innovation in Brazil, with government and corporate contracts that moved hundreds of millions. But as Rafael displayed upward trending graphs and ambitious projections, his phone vibrated discreetly with a video call from Home Sofia, as always at 7 p.m. before dinner. He pressed the decline button with his thumb without even looking at the screen, a gesture as automatic as it was cruel, and continued his presentation without missing a beat. Rafael Mendes was the son of retired teachers from the interior of Minas Gerais, who didn't quite understand what their son did, but knew it involved expensive computers and a lot of money. He had built everything from scratch. His first startup sold at 27, the second at 32, and finally TechVision at 35, which was to be his permanent legacy, or so he believed. He met Laura, his wife, at a technology conference where she was presenting research on ethics in artificial intelligence. She was a philosophy professor, a woman who preferred old books to new gadgets, who challenged him intellectually in ways no investor ever could. They married 6 months later, and Sofia was born a year after the wedding, a green-eyed girl who inherited her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's silent stubbornness. But Laura was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when Sofia was only 5. 18 months of aggressive treatments, renewed hopes, followed by devastating relapses, until one autumn afternoon she died in her hospital room, holding Rafael's hand with surprising strength and whispering, "Don't let work steal her from you too." Rafael promised, but promises made on deathbeds have a peculiar way of dissolving when the pain of loss becomes unbearable. He plunged into work like a man drowning himself in drink, completely and deliberately, using every meeting, every contract, every line of code as an anesthetic against the void Laura had left. Sofia, at 7, lost not only her mother but also the father who remained physically present but emotionally absent. It was into this vacuum that Beatriz Santos entered their lives. She was 33 when she was hired as the head housekeeper for the triplex penthouse in Itaim Bibi, recommended by an elite agency that promised professionals of absolute trust for high-net-worth families. Beatriz was efficient, quiet, and crucially, had been present during Laura's final months, helping with medications and accompanying her to appointments when Rafael was stuck in unavoidable meetings. Laura, in her last lucid moments, had held Beatriz's hand and pleaded, "Take care of my Sofia, please." Beatriz promised with tears in her eyes, and Rafael, devastated and grateful, trusted her completely. For the next 3 years, Beatriz became the only constant in Sofia's life, the woman who prepared her breakfast, took her to school, helped with her homework, and put her to bed when Rafael worked until midnight. The triplex penthouse was a monument to success and loneliness. 300 square meters of imported marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking an endless skyline of buildings, and minimalist decor in shades of grey and white that an architecture magazine once described as corporate residential elegance. Sofia's room was the only explosion of color in the entire apartment. Light pink walls that Laura had chosen, shelves filled with books her mother had collected since before she was born, and a canopy bed covered in stuffed animals that Sofia arranged in a specific order every night. But that colorful room was an isolated island in an ocean of modern coldness, just as Sofia was a living child, trapped in a house that functioned more like a museum than a home. Sofia was a quiet girl who had learned early on not to ask for much. She was 9, but spoke like someone older, using words she picked up from her mother's books, and had a habit of tilting her head when she was thinking about something profound. At the elite private school she attended, her teachers always commented at parent-teacher conferences, which Beatriz attended because Rafael never had time. Sofia is brilliant, but distant. She prefers to read alone during recess rather than play with other children. Raphael would hear these reports over the phone between one meeting and another and vaguely think he should do something about it. But what exactly? He no longer knew how to connect with the daughter who looked more and more like the wife he had lost, and this resemblance was both a comfort and an open wound. Beatriz Santos, on the other hand, knew exactly how to connect with Sofia, or at least she pretended to. For the first 2 years, she was genuinely affectionate, sincere hugs, dedicated attention, a real interest in the stories Sofia told about the books she read. But in the 3rd year, something began to change. Perhaps it was seeing Raphael spend 50,000 reais on a Swiss watch without blinking, while negotiating Beatriz's annual salary increase as if it were pennies. Perhaps it was hearing Sofia innocently complain about an expensive gift her father had sent from Tokyo, while Beatriz sent almost her entire salary to her family in the Northeast. Perhaps it was simply the slow, poisonous accumulation of resentment that grows when you care for someone else's child, give them love and presence, but remain eternally just the help in the casual words of visitors. The catalyzing event came 2 weeks before Raphael was due to travel to Asia. Sofia had a routine pediatrician appointment at 4 p.m. On a Tuesday, something simple, just the school's mandatory annual checkup. Raphael had scheduled it 3 months in advance and left an explicit note for Beatriz. "This is important, don't forget." But Beatriz forgot. Or rather, she was at the mall buying a gift for her niece and simply decided she could reschedule later. When Raphael called at 5 p.m. to ask how the appointment went, Beatriz invented a clumsy excuse about impossible traffic that wasn't convincing. Raphael, who normally let Beatriz manage everything without question, exploded this time. "You have one responsibility, Beatriz. I pay you very well precisely so these things don't happen. This is unacceptable." The call lasted 3 minutes, but the words echoed for weeks. Beatriz hung up the phone with her hands shaking, not from fear, but from deep humiliation. Sofia was in the next room and had heard everything through the thin wall. That night, when she went to put Sofia to bed, Beatriz forced a smile and said everything was fine. But Sofia saw something different in the housekeeper's eyes, a coldness that wasn't there before, a distance that settled like ice between them. In the following days, Beatriz continued to perform her duties perfectly, breakfast on time, lunchbox packed, clothes laundered, but the affection had evaporated. And when Raphael casually announced during a quick dinner that he would be traveling to Asia for 3 weeks to close a $50 million investment round, Beatriz simply nodded politely and thought, 3 weeks is more than enough time for a man who chose money over family to learn what really matters, even if the lesson comes too late. The early morning was silent when Beatriz entered Sofia's room at 2 a.m., 3 days after Raphael had departed for Tokyo. The girl was sleeping soundly, clutching one of her mother's books that she always kept near her bed, her breathing soft and even, the breath of someone who still believes the world is safe. Beatriz turned on only the bedside lamp, casting long shadows on the light pink walls, and touched Sofia's shoulder with a firmness that left no room for resistance. "Wake up, Sofia. We need to leave now." The girl opened her eyes, confused, still caught between dream and reality. It took her a few seconds to focus on Beatriz's face, a face she had known for years, but which at that moment held a hardness Sofia had never seen before. "Auntie Bia? What happened? Is it Dad?" The fear in her voice was palpable, the primal terror of a child who has already lost one parent and lives with the constant possibility of losing the other. "Your father is fine," Beatriz replied in a controlled voice that came out too cold to be comforting. "But he called me. He decided it's better for you to go to a boarding school, a place where you'll have structure, a better education, where you won't be alone while he travels." The words were chosen carefully, each one a small blade designed to cut without leaving a visible wound. Sophia sat up in bed, the book falling to the floor with a sound muffled by the soft carpet. Boarding school, but Dad never talked about that. Can I call him? Beatrice shook her head, already pulling a small bag from the closet and throwing some clothes inside, unfolded and uncared for. He's in an important meeting. You know your father work always comes first. He asked me to handle this discreetly, to avoid a scene. Sophia got out of bed on trembling legs, wearing only the flannel pajamas with the star pattern that Laura had bought months before she died. But can I say goodbye to him first? Can I take my things? My books? There was a rising panic in her voice, the kind of childish desperation that comes when the ground disappears from under your feet. Beatrice finally looked directly at her, and for a split second, Sophia saw something that terrified her more than any words: pleasure. There was pleasure in Beatrice's eyes, a cold satisfaction at seeing the girl fall apart. You can take 3 books, choose quickly, and put on a coat. It's cold outside. The casual cruelty of those instructions, 3 books from a collection of hundreds that were the emotional inheritance from her dead mother, was the first real crack in the reality Sophia had known. With trembling hands, Sophia chose the 3 books that mattered most. The Little Prince, her parents' honeymoon edition, Anne of Green Gables, her mother's favorite, and an illustrated book of fairy tales that Laura used to read to her every night before she got too sick. She put them in her small backpack, along with a photo of her mother and a silver bracelet her father had given her on her last birthday, objects that would become her only anchors in the coming months. Beatrice hurried her down the empty hallway of the penthouse, past the immense living room where family photos smiled from shelves in expensive frames, past the office where Raphael spent nights working instead of being with his daughter, past the kitchen where Sophia and her mother used to make pancakes on Sundays before cancer stole even those small rituals. No lights were turned on, as if they were running from something, and maybe they were, Sophia thought confusedly. Maybe they were running from a danger she didn't understand, but that Beatrice clearly saw. Beatrice's car was an old model that Sophia rarely saw, as they were always driven by Raphael's driver in the armored SUV. Now, at 2:30 in the morning, Sophia was placed in the back seat like a piece of luggage, and Beatrice drove in silence through the empty streets of São Paulo toward the East Zonia direction Sophia didn't recognize, as her entire life had taken place in the city's wealthy quadrant. Auntie Bea, how long will I be at the boarding school? Will it be like Harry Potter, with classes and friends? Sophia tried to find some point of reference, some familiar narrative to make sense of it all. Beatrice didn't answer immediately, focused on the road, and when she finally spoke, her voice had a distant, almost dreamy quality. It will be exactly what you deserve, Sophia. A place where you will learn what really matters in life. They drove for over an hour, entering neighborhoods that became progressively poorer, darker and more distant from the bubble of privilege where Sophia had spent her entire existence. The wide, well-lit streets of Itaim gave way to narrow alleys with broken streetlights, houses crammed together and walls covered in graffiti with messages Sophia couldn't fully read in the darkness. Finally, Beatrice stopped in front of a low, worn-down building with a faded sign, New Hope Shelter. It didn't look like the pictures of boarding schools Sophia had seen in books. There were no green gardens, no imposing gates, no elegant uniforms. It looked, she would later think, exactly like what it was, a repository for children nobody wanted. "Put this on," Beatrice said abruptly, holding up a makeshift blindfold made from a scarf. "It's the boarding school security protocol. All new children arrive like this so they don't memorize the way." Sophia, at 9 years old, still trusted adults enough to obey even when every instinct screamed danger. She let Beatrice tie the scarf over her eyes, turning the world to total darkness, and allowed herself to be led out of the car. She heard a door creak, smelled mold and cheap disinfectant, and heard Beatrice's low voice talking to someone, words like orphan niece, temporary, and I'll pick her up in a few days, floated to her, but didn't form a complete thought. Hands that were not Beatrice's took her by the shoulder, and then the blindfold was yanked off. Sophia blinked, adjusting to the harsh fluorescent light, and saw a narrow hallway with peeling paint, a strong smell of reheated food and sweat, and the distant sound of children crying. When she turned to ask Beatrice when she would be back, the housekeeper was already walking away, without a backward glance, her footsteps echoing farther and farther away, until they were swallowed by the sound of a door slamming shut with finality. The woman who was left in charge of Sophia, tired-looking lady in her 50s, with deep dark circles and an expression of someone who had seen too much, glanced at the small backpack and the obviously high-quality clothes Sophia was wearing. "Name?" she asked mechanically, holding a clipboard with crumpled papers. "Sophia Mendes," the girl replied in a small voice, her eyes still fixed on the door through which Beatrice had disappeared. "The woman said it's temporary, that they'll pick me up soon. My dad, he's going to call to see how I am, right?" The woman sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that carries decades of broken promises and dashed hopes. "Of course, dear. Everyone who comes here is temporary. Now come on, I'll show you where you'll be sleeping." She led Sophia down a corridor that smelled of institutionalized despair, past overcrowded rooms where children slept in cramped bunk beds, to a space with 8 beds, 5 of which were already occupied. Sophia spent the first 2 weeks in a state of dissociative shock, waiting at any moment for her father to appear, for Beatrice to return with a smile and apologize for the mistake. She didn't eat properly, didn't talk to the other children, just hugged her 3 books and reread the same passages obsessively. At night, other children in the dormitory whispered their own stories of abandonment parents who promised to come back and never did, relatives who said, "just for a few days," which turned into months, then years, then permanence. A 12-year-old girl, a 3-year veteran of the shelter, told Sophia with the brutal honesty of experience, "Nobody comes back. The sooner you accept it, the less it will hurt." It was that sentence more than anything else that broke something fundamental inside Sophia. On the 15th day, when she noticed that a back gate was always broken and unguarded, she made the decision that would define the next 2 months. She would run away and find her father on her own, because clearly something terrible must have happened for him not to have come for her yet. At 4 in the morning on a Thursday, Sophia put her 3 precious books in her backpack, tied on a pair of worn-out sneakers someone had donated to the shelter, and walked out the back door without looking back. She was 9 years old, didn't know the city beyond the wealthy quadrant where she had always lived, had no money, no phone, nothing except 3 books and an irrational but unshakable conviction. Her father had not abandoned her. Something was wrong, and she had to find out what. The streets of the East Zone at 4 a.m. were a different world from anything Sophia had ever known. Tired workers heading to shifts that started before dawn, vendors setting up market stalls, and an entire population of invisible people who kept the city running while the rich slept in their protected penthouses. Sophia walked with no clear destination, guided only by the vague notion that she needed to get back downtown, where the buildings were taller and she might find something familiar. She didn't know she was beginning a 2-month journey that would transform her from a protected child into a survivor, from a privileged student into a street teacher, from Sophia Mendes into Teacher Soso, the girl who taught other forgotten children how to read, while her father, miles away, believed she was safe and comfortable in an elite boarding school that never existed. Rafael Mendes landed at Guarulhos Airport at 11 p.m. on a Friday, 3 weeks after leaving for Asia with promises that the trip would be quick and productive. The trip had been a resounding success. $50 million secured, contracts signed, that would put TechVision on the global map, meetings with investors that validated years of obsessive work. But during the 14-hour flight, he couldn't sleep, disturbed by a recurring dream where Sophia was calling for him, her voice growing more and more distant until it disappeared completely. When the driver picked him up and they drove through the city toward the penthouse, Raphael took out his phone and typed a message to Beatrice. "I've landed. How is Sophia? Can I talk to her, even though it's late?" The reply came in less than a minute. "She's at the boarding school, sir. Remember you authorized the transfer before you left? She's doing very well. An excellent adjustment." Raphael stared at the message, confused, trying to dredge up any memory of the authorization Beatrice mentioned. The last few weeks before the trip had been a blur of preparations, presentations, and documents signed in a hurry between meetings. Was it possible he had authorized something without fully processing it? He had delegated so much of his domestic life to Beatrice over the past few years that it seemed plausible. "What boarding school?" he typed back, feeling a growing unease he couldn't name. "St. Clair in Campos do Jordão. You signed the enrollment forms 2 weeks before you left. An excellent institution, holistic education, exactly what Sophia needed to get out of her loneliness here in the penthouse. She's flourishing there, according to the reports I've received." Raphael read the message 3 times, each word planting a seed of doubt. He didn't remember, but his memory of the past few months was fragmented by overwork and sleep deprivation. When he arrived at the penthouse, everything was impeccably clean, as always. But there was a difference he noticed immediately. Sophia's room had been transformed. The light pink walls had been repainted a neutral grey, the bookshelves removed, the canopy bed replaced with a modern desk and a new computer. "What happened in here?" Raphael asked Beatrice, who was waiting in the living room with a calm expression. "You approved the renovation, remember? You thought it would be nice for Sophia to have a more grown-up room when she came back for the holidays. She's 9 now, not a little girl anymore." Beatrice spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who has told a truth so many times it has become real. "All of her belongings are in storage. I can show you if you'd like." But Raphael didn't want to see, because seeing would mean confronting the possibility that he had indeed authorized all this and simply forgotten, which said something terrible about the kind of father he had become. "I want to talk to her," Raphael said, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "Now, give me the number for the boarding school." Beatrice maintained her neutral expression, but her fingers tightened slightly on the strap of the purse she was carrying. "It's 11:30 at night, sir. The rules at St. Clair are strict no contact after 9 p.m. so as not to interrupt the children's sleep routine. It's part of their pedagogical method, but I can schedule a video call for tomorrow morning." Every word was reasonable, every explanation plausible. But together, they formed a narrative that made Raphael's stomach churn. "Show me the documents, everything. Enrollment, authorization, progress reports." Beatrice nodded calmly and went to her office in the apartment, returning with an organized folder, forms with his digital signature, which she had access to for administrative matters, photographs of a beautiful building in Campos do Jordão with green gardens, and printed reports on Sophia's excellent development. Raphael examined each page, searching for any inconsistency, any proof that this was a fabrication. But everything seemed real or real enough to pass a cursory inspection by an exhausted father who wanted to believe he had done the right thing. "Why don't I remember signing this?" he asked, more to himself than to Beatrice. "You were very stressed, sir. Those were intense weeks before your trip. You yourself said you weren't sleeping well, that you were forgetting appointments. Remember when you missed that meeting with the people from IBM because you mixed up the times?" She was right, he had missed that meeting. He had forgotten his own mother's birthday. He had shown up for medical appointments on the wrong days. It was entirely possible that his memory was failing, that he had authorized Sophia's transfer in a moment of hasty decision-making that he now couldn't recall. Over the next 3 weeks, Raphael tried to establish some communication with his daughter. Beatrice always had an explanation for why it wasn't possible at that specific moment. Sophia was on an educational excursion, she was in an adaptive therapy session, she was on a meditation retreat for children, she was in mandatory extracurricular activities. The St. Clair method is intensive, sir. They really isolate the children in the first term to break unhealthy emotional dependencies and build autonomy. It's exactly what Sophia needed after spending so much time with only adults here. And Raphael, who understood technology but not pedagogy, who trusted experts because he himself was an expert in his field, accepted it. But at night, alone in the silent penthouse, he would visit the storage unit where Sophia's belongings were packed and hold the books that had belonged to Laura, feeling the crushing weight of decisions he didn't remember making. The turning point came in the 4th week after his return. Raphael woke up at 3 in the morning from a nightmare where Sophia was calling for him, her voice echoing as if from a great distance, and he couldn't find her no matter how fast he ran. He went down to his office, sweating and trembling, and instead of trying to go back to sleep, he did something he hadn't done in years. He opened a bottle of expensive whiskey he had received from investors and drank straight from the neck, trying to drown the anxiety that was growing like a tumor. It was in this state, drunk and desperate at 4 in the morning, that he picked up the phone and called not Beatrice, but a private investigator his company used for due diligence on acquisitions. "I need you to go to Campos do Jordão and confirm that my daughter is okay at a boarding school called St. Clair. Don't tell them you're coming. I want photos, videos, visual confirmation that she's there and she's healthy. I'll pay you triple if you do it today." The investigator, a 50-year-old ex-federal police officer named Marcos, found the request strange, but the money was good enough not to ask questions. He drove to Campos do Jordão the next morning, armed with the address Raphael provided and a discreet camera. 6 hours later, he called Raphael, who was in a meeting with TechVision's board of directors. "Mr. Mendes, I need to speak with you urgently. There is no St. Clair boarding school in Campos do Jordão. I went to the address you gave me. It's a bed and breakfast. I called the City Hall, the Department of Education. There are no records of any institution with that name. It never existed." The words fell on Raphael like a bomb, and he stumbled out of the meeting, asking his driver to pick him up immediately. In the car, he called Beatrice 3 times in a row. All calls went straight to voicemail. When he arrived at the penthouse, she wasn't there, and the drawers in her office were empty. Raphael confronted Beatrice 2 hours later when she finally returned, carrying shopping bags as if it were a normal day. "Where is Sophia?" he asked without preamble, his voice oscillating between rage and absolute panic. Beatrice turned pale, the bags dropping from her hands. "Sir, she's at the boarding school." But the lie came out too weak, too transparent. "There is no boarding school. Where did you put my daughter?" Raphael advanced, and for the first time in 3 years, Beatrice saw the man who had built a tech empire from nothing. Not the absent, delegating father, but the ruthless executive who destroyed competitors. Under pressure, cornered, and realizing the game was over, Beatrice crumbled. Between calculated sobs and pathetic excuses, she confessed she had placed Sophia in a shelter in the East Zone 2 months ago as a temporary lesson for Raphael to learn to value what he had. "I was going to pick her up after a few weeks, I swear. I just wanted you to understand that money isn't everything, that you were losing your daughter." But when she went to check week after week, she always found excuses to postpone it, until it became easier to continue the lie than to face the consequences. Raphael called the police immediately, and Beatrice was arrested for kidnapping and document forgery, crying and screaming that she did it for Sophia, for her own good. But Raphael wasn't listening anymore. He was already in the car, his driver speeding illegally toward the address of the shelter that Beatrice had finally provided. He arrived there at 7 in the evening, forced his way past the stunned director, and ran through every corridor shouting his daughter's name. But Sophia wasn't there. The tired woman who had received Sophia 2 months earlier confirmed it. The girl ran away 6 weeks ago. I thought someone had come for her. These kids, they run away all the time. We don't have the resources to look for them. 6 weeks. Sophia had been on the streets of Sao Paulo for 6 weeks, while Raphael was closing multi-million-dollar deals and sleeping in his 300-square-meter penthouse, believing she was safe. He fell to his knees right there in the shelter's filthy hallway, and for the first time since Laura's funeral, Rafael Mendez wept, not the silent tears of restrained grief, but the deep sobs of a man who realizes he has built an empire on sand and is about to lose the only thing that ever truly mattered. The police investigation into Beatriz Santos revealed layers of betrayal that went far beyond Sophia's abandonment. In her apartment, detectives found evidence of financial misappropriation totaling over 200,000 reais over 5 years, a corporate card used for personal purchases disguised as household supplies, transfers to family members' accounts justified as medical emergencies that never happened, and even expensive jewelry she would buy and resell using Raphael's name. But when the detectives presented these findings, expecting some reaction, Raphael just looked at the documents with absolute indifference. I don't care about the money. Where is my daughter? That was the only question that mattered, repeated obsessively to anyone who crossed his path: police officers, investigators, social workers, even reporters who were beginning to sniff out the story of a billionaire who lost his own daughter. In her detention cell, Beatrice alternated between justifying her actions as an attempt to teach a lesson and breaking down in tears as she realized she had turned petty revenge into a real tragedy. The official search for Sophia began immediately. Her photo was distributed to all police stations in Sao Paulo, alerts were sent to schools and hospitals, and teams scoured shelters and known gathering spots for street children. But Sao Paulo had over 12 million inhabitants and thousands of invisible children living on the margins. Finding one specific girl was like looking for a particular star in an entire galaxy. Raphael completely abandoned Tech Vision, delegating operations to his vice president and cancelling all appointments indefinitely. His days became 16-hour expeditions through the streets. He walked through Cracolândia, talking to drug users who sometimes saw children passing by. He visited squares where homeless people gathered. He handed out photos of Sophia at bus terminals and subway stations. He offered a 100,000 real reward for information leading to her, and his phone exploded with hundreds of calls, 99% of them scams or false leads from people desperate for money. It was during one of these exhaustive searches, in his 3rd week of combing the streets non-stop, that Raphael found Dona Maria. She was a woman of about 60 who had been living on the streets for a decade, known in the S region as the mother of the children, because she protected minors who ran away from shelters or were abandoned by their families. Raphael found her handing out bread, donated by local merchants, surrounded by 5 or 6 dirty children who clearly trusted her. He approached cautiously, showing Sophia's photo, and for the first time in weeks, he saw something beyond indifference or pity in someone's eyes. He saw recognition. This girl, I don't know her personally, but I've heard about her. There's a child they call the teacher. They say she teaches other kids to read in a square near Marginal Pinheiros on the south side. I don't know if it's her, but the description fits. A young girl, well-spoken, always with books. Raphael's heart pounded with a violence that almost knocked him over. The teacher? How old is she? What does she look like? Dona Maria frowned, trying to recall details from stories she had heard from others. About 9, 10, haircut funny, like she did it herself. thin but smart. People say she's different from the other street kids, doesn't ask for money, doesn't steal, just sits there reading and teaching. Seems a bit lost, you know? Like she's waiting for someone to come get her. Each word was both a knife and a balm. The pain of imagining Sophia in those conditions, but the desperate hope that she was alive, that there was still a chance to fix what had been broken. Rafael thanked Donna Maria with a choked voice and transferred 5,000 reais to her on the spot. She refused at first, but he insisted, "Please, you take care of the children, no one else does. It's the least I can do." Discovering the full extent of Beatrice's betrayal was secondary to the goal of finding Sophia, but the pain of that revelation cut deep in ways Rafael hadn't expected. He had entrusted her with the most precious thing he had let this woman care for his daughter based on a promise made on Laura's deathbed. "Take care of my Sophia," Laura had pleaded, and Beatrice had promised with sincere tears, or at least Rafael had believed they were sincere. Now he wondered how many of those tears were real and how many were a calculated performance. The forensic psychologists who evaluated Beatrice explained that she likely started with genuine affection, but years of accumulated resentment, being treated as a replaceable employee despite their emotional intimacy, seeing the family spend on frivolities while she saved every penny, had turned love into hate, care into revenge. "But that doesn't justify it," Rafael said in a dead voice. "Nothing justifies using an innocent child as an instrument of retribution." Rafael's true emotional devastation came not from Beatrice's betrayal, but from the growing realization of his own complicity. Even before Beatrice acted, he had already abandoned Sophia in more subtle but equally destructive ways. Every missed dinner, every skipped school recital, every declined video call because he was in an important meeting. He had used work as an anesthetic against the pain of losing Laura, but in the process, he was losing Sophia too, just more slowly, more silently, in ways that left no visible marks, but eroded the connection between them day by day. Beatrice had only accelerated a process he had already started, and this truth was harder to face than any external betrayal. At night, alone in the empty penthouse he was in the process of selling, he could no longer sleep there, surrounded by the ghosts of wrong decisions. Rafael would reread old messages from Sophia on his phone. "Daddy, can you come to my recital tomorrow? I'm going to play that song Mommy liked," sent 3 months earlier. He had replied, "I have a meeting, sweetie, but you'll be great," with an empty emoji that was no substitute for presence. With the information from Donna Maria, Rafael focused his search on the marginal Pinheiros region in the South Zone. For days, he scoured every square, every overpass, every public space where children might gather. He distributed more photos, talked to local vendors, to recyclable material collectors, to night security guards, anyone who might have seen a girl matching the description. A hot dog vendor finally confirmed it. "Oh, Teacher So-So. Yeah, she shows up sometimes in a square near here after dark. Teaches the street kids using old books. It's sweet to see, you know, in the midst of so much misery, that little girl trying to do something good." The nickname So-So pierced Rafael like a bullet. It was the nickname he had used when Sophia was a baby, when the world still made sense, when Laura was alive and they were a complete family. That she was using that nickname now on the streets, teaching abandoned children, surviving alone, was so devastating that Rafael had to lean against a post to keep from falling. It was then, armed with a more precise location and an approximate time, that Rafael began his nightly vigils in the area. He would go every afternoon around 5 and stay until midnight, walking through the squares, waiting, watching. His executives called, worried about the company's stock, which was plummeting without his leadership. But Rafael no longer answered. Money, power, success, had all revealed itself to be exactly as empty as Laura had warned it would be in her last words. During these vigils, Raphael saw a side of Sao Paulo that existed parallel to his reality of penthouses and armored cars, but that he had never truly perceived. Entire families sleeping under overpasses, 5- and 6-year-old children begging for food with eyes that had already seen too much, teenagers prostituting themselves because it was either that or starve. And somewhere in this subterranean world that the city preferred to pretend didn't exist, his Sophia was surviving, teaching, waiting, still believing against all evidence that he would come for her. On the 10th night of his vigil, when Raphael was already starting to lose hope and consider expanding his search to other regions, he saw her. It was almost 7 in the evening, the sky already dark with that characteristic polluted orange hue of Sao Paulo, when he walked through a small square near the marginal that he hadn't fully checked yet. There was a group of children, maybe 8 or 9, sitting on the ground near a streetlight that flickered intermittently. And in the center, in a clear voice that cut through the noise of the nearby traffic, a girl was reading from a book. Raphael couldn't see her face immediately because her back was to him, but something in her posture, the way she held the book, the way she gestured to emphasize points in the story, was so familiar that he felt his knees go weak. He approached slowly, his heart beating so hard it seemed audible, each step an eternity, each breath a conscious effort. The girl was reading, "And the prince came back for his daughter because he realized that the entire kingdom was worth nothing without her." The words were from The Little Prince, not exactly as Saint-Exupéry wrote them, but a childish interpretation. Sophia telling the story as she understood it, adapting it so the younger children around her could comprehend. Raphael stopped 3 meters away, unable to move, tears already streaming down his face. He tried to speak, but no sound came out, his throat completely closed by an emotion too big for one body to contain. Sophia finished the page and closed the book carefully, as if it were a precious treasure. She turned around, and for the first time in 2.5 months, father and daughter stood face to face, 3 seconds of absolute silence where the world stopped. Her green eyes, Laura's eyes met his. Sophia blinked, confused as if she was seeing a mirage, and then she whispered in a voice so small, Raphael almost couldn't hear it. "Daddy!" Raphael fell to his knees on the square's dirty sidewalk. The physical pain of the impact against the concrete irrelevant compared to the emotional agony of seeing his Sophia like this. The hair that used to be carefully combed and shiny was now cut irregularly in uneven tufts that she had clearly trimmed herself with something that wasn't proper scissors. The clothes she wore were the same ones Beatrice had made her put on that morning 2 months ago, now torn in several places, stained with the kind of grime that weeks on the streets accumulate. Her bare feet had cuts in various stages of healing, some still crusted with dried blood, and calluses had formed in places a 9-year-old child's skin should never have them. But it was her face that broke Raphael completely, too thin, with deep dark circles under her eyes, but still the face he saw in his dreams, the one he carried in his wallet in a photo taken 6 months earlier on a happier day that now felt like a lifetime ago. Sophia stood motionless, clutching the book to her chest like a shield, her eyes wide with a shock that was not just surprise but almost terror. The other children around her retreated instinctively. In their experience, adults meant danger. They meant police or social workers who would take them to shelters they would just run away from again. Or worse, they meant the predators that Sao Paulo's streets hid in abundance. But Sophia didn't run. She remained frozen, looking at Raphael as if he were an apparition, something that couldn't be real because good things don't happen to abandoned children in dirty squares. "Sophia," Raphael finally managed to say, his voice broken and hoarse. "Sophia, it's me. It's Daddy. I came to get you. I didn't know. I thought you were safe. Forgive me, please forgive me." The words tumbled out in a desperate torrent, tears streaming uncontrollably, his hands extended in a plea, but not touching because he didn't know if he had the right to, if he was still allowed to hug the daughter he had failed so completely. You didn't know?" Sophia finally asked, her voice so small that Raphael had to lean in to hear it over the noise from the nearby marginal. "Auntie Bea said you didn't want me anymore, that I was a burden, that you asked her to take me away because you only wanted to work." Each word was a poisoned dagger, not because Sophia spoke with anger, but because she spoke with acceptance, as if she had believed it. As if she had spent 2 months processing and internalizing the idea that her own father had discarded her. Raphael shook his head violently, sobs escaping between his words. "No, no, never. She lied. She kidnapped you. She tricked me by saying you were at a boarding school. I've looked for you every single day since I found out. Every day, every night. You are the only thing that matters, the only thing that has ever mattered. I was a terrible father before, I know that, but I never, ever wanted to lose you." Sophia took a step back, her confusion giving way to something more complex, wanting to believe, but being afraid to, wanting to run into his arms, but remembering the fake messages Beatrice had shown her, the video calls that never happened, the 2 months spent sleeping on sidewalks, wondering why no one came. "If you were looking, why did it take so long? I was here. I was right here in this city. How did you not find me sooner?" The accusation was fair, and Raphael had no defense that would make sense to a 9-year-old child. How could he explain that São Paulo has 12 million people, that street children are invisible by design, that he had privileges that built walls instead of bridges? He couldn't. So he just told the simplest truth. "Because I failed. Because I wasn't paying enough attention before to notice when you were gone. Because I trusted the wrong person. Because I'm a terrible father who almost lost the most important thing. But I found you now, and I will never, ever let you go again." Sophia looked at the other children around her, the children who had become her makeshift family over the last few weeks, who depended on her for the nightly reading lessons, who slept a little more soundly knowing that teacher Soso was there. "I can't go," she said finally, her voice gaining strength. "They have no one. If I leave, who will teach them? Who will read them stories? Who will remind them that they're important?" Raphael looked at the children for the first time, truly a boy of perhaps 7, in a shirt 3 sizes too big, a girl of 5 or 6 sucking her thumb, a 12-year-old teenager with a deep scar on his face, all looking at Sophia as if she were their guiding star. And in that moment, Raphael understood. While he had been building empires of technology, his 9-year-old daughter had built something far more important: a community. A space of dignity and learning in the midst of absolute abandonment. "Then we'll take care of them together," Raphael heard himself say, the words coming out before his brain could fully process them. "Can you teach me how to do it right? How to help them the way you've been helping?" Sophia blinked, surprised, and for the first time a crack appeared in her defensive armor. "How?" she asked. Raphael took out his phone with trembling hands and started making calls right there, in front of Sophia and the children. First to his assistant, ordering them to book rooms in a nearby hotel, then to his driver to bring a large van, then to a children's clothing store to open after hours, then to a private doctor to conduct urgent evaluations. Each call was Raphael using the resources he had: money, power, connections, but now directed towards something that actually mattered, instead of just accumulating more money and power in an empty cycle. Within 2 hours, an impossible scene was unfolding. 8 street children, including Sophia, were sitting on the sofas in the lobby of a 4-star hotel while a nervous manager tried to process what was happening. Raphael had paid for 5 family-sized rooms, with clean beds, bathrooms with hot water, and televisions that none of those children would have had access to under normal circumstances. He ordered food, not expensive food from a fancy restaurant, but pizza, hamburgers, French fries, and soda, things that children actually like. And as they ate with an urgency that revealed how many meals they had skipped, Raphael sat next to Sophia, maintaining a respectful distance, not forcing contact. Tomorrow we're going to the doctor, all of us, to treat those cuts to make sure everyone is okay. Then new clothes, shoes that fit, and we'll find out where each of you is supposed to be, if you have family looking for you, if there's a safe place. Sophia ate slowly, glancing at Raphael between bites, as if he might disappear if she blinked. And what if they don't have family? What if there's no safe place? The question was loaded with weight because she was also asking about herself. Was there a safe place for her after everything that had happened? Raphael took a deep breath. Then we'll create one. We'll create a place where children like you can be safe, can learn, can grow, a place where no one is forgotten. It was an enormous, perhaps impossible promise, but he made it with the conviction of someone who had finally understood his real purpose. Sophia continued eating in silence, processing, and Raphael noticed she kept the tattered copy of The Little Prince beside her on the sofa. Even with her hands full of food, that book had become her lifeline, a physical connection to the parents she thought she had lost. That night, after all the children had gone to their rooms and taken hot showers for the first time in weeks or months, after they had been tucked into clean beds with soft blankets, Raphael sat on the edge of the bed Sophia occupied alone. She had asked for a separate room, still not comfortable with proximity. She was lying on her side, hugging the book, her eyes open and staring at the ceiling. "Sophia," Raphael began in a soft voice, "I know I can't fix what happened. I can't give you back the last 2 months. I can't erase the fear, the abandonment, everything you went through. But I can promise that every single day from now on, I will be here. I will be present. Not perfect because I'm clearly not, but present. You will never have to look for me on your own again because I will never lose sight of you again." Sophia turned to look at him, tears finally streaming down the clean face the bath had revealed, and whispered, "I taught 8 kids how to read, Daddy, using Mom's books. Would Mom be proud?" Raphael couldn't answer immediately because sobs completely took over. He nodded vigorously, unable to speak, and when Sophia reached out her small hand and touched his for the first time in 2 months, he held it as if he were holding life itself. "She is so proud," he finally managed to say, "and so am I. You are braver, kinder, and stronger than I will ever be. You survived what no one should have to survive, and still found the strength to help others. You are exactly who your mother hoped you would be, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the father you deserve." Sophia closed her eyes, tears still streaming, but for the first time in 2 months, her face completely relaxed. She didn't say, "I forgive you," because forgiveness is a long, complex process that doesn't happen in one night. But she held his hand and whispered, "Stay until I fall asleep." And Raphael whispered back, "I'll stay forever if you'll let me." He sat there, holding his daughter's hand as she finally slept in safety, and for the first time since Laura died, Raphael Mendez understood that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or billion-dollar companies, but in moments like this, simple, broken, but real. 3 months after that night in the square, Raphael Mendez was sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair in a renovated building in São Paulo's South Zone, watching Sophia lead a reading session for 25 children. The building had been an abandoned warehouse that he bought and transformed into the Sophia Reads Instituta, a name chosen not by him, but by the children themselves, in a democratic vote Sophia had insisted on. The walls were now painted in vibrant colors, with murals made by the children. Shelves full of donated books occupied every corner. There were clean mats for anyone who needed to sleep, an equipped kitchen that served 3 meals a day, and a small but dedicated team of educators, psychologists, and social workers. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was real, functional, and growing. The original 8 children Sophia had taught in the square were the first residents, and since then, 17 more had been welcomed through partnerships with the city's social services. Rafael had sold his majority stake in TechVision for a sum that business headlines described as one of the largest transactions in the Brazilian tech sector, but which for him was simply a means to a more important end. He kept a minority stake sufficient to live comfortably and dedicated half of the fortune to the Institute, establishing a permanent fund that would guarantee its operation for decades. The other half was divided between a trust for Sophia and donations to organizations working with vulnerable children. The triplex penthouse was sold. Rafael could no longer enter that space without feeling the crushing weight of all the wrong decisions made there, and he and Sophia moved into a smaller apartment in Pinheiros with 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room filled with books, and a kitchen where they tried, with varying success, to cook together on weekends. It was a life radically different from the one Rafael had lived for the past 10 years, but for the first time since Laura died, he woke up feeling a purpose beyond rising numbers on a spreadsheet. Sophia was now 10 years old, attending therapy twice a week with a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma, and was slowly rebuilding the ability to trust that the 2 months on the streets had eroded. There were bad days, nightmares, where she woke up screaming, thinking she was back in the square. Panic attacks when Rafael had to travel, even for a day, moments where she tested boundaries to see if he would really stay or if he would disappear again. Rafael learned to navigate these moments with the therapist's help, learned that healing is not linear, that some wounds leave permanent scars, but that it is still possible to live a full life with them. Physically, Sophia had regained a healthy weight. The cuts on her feet had healed completely, and her hair was growing in evenly after a professional stylist corrected the jagged cut she had given herself. But it was the less visible changes that mattered most. She began to smile genuinely again, to make plans for the future, to believe she was loved. The most profound transformation, however, had been in Rafael. He reduced his workday to 6 hours, half dedicated to occasional remote consulting for TechVision, the other half managing the Institute's operations. But more importantly, he blocked out sacred times that were non-negotiable. Breakfast with Sophia every morning, taking her to and from school personally, dinners together with no phones or laptops, entire Saturdays dedicated to Father-Daughter Day, where they did whatever Sophia wanted. Executives who had worked with him for the past 10 years commented that he seemed like a different person. His hair was starting to go gray. He had deeper expression lines from smiling so much, and his eyes had lost their predatory intensity but gained something warmer. "You look older but happier," his former partner remarked at a business lunch. Rafael replied, "It's because I'm finally living instead of just existing." The Institute had inevitably gained media attention. The story of a billionaire CEO who lost his daughter on the streets and then dedicated his fortune to creating a shelter was too powerful a narrative to go unnoticed. Rafael initially resisted the exposure, wanting to protect Sophia's privacy, but she surprisingly agreed to an interview for a morning television show on one condition: that they talk about the other children, not just her. The interview went viral, not because of the tragedy, but because of the message. Sophia, sitting next to her father with a posture that was half child, half survivor, calmly explained that a lot of kids aren't lucky enough to have parents who can look for them. Those kids deserve a safe place too. The video garnered millions of views, and donations began pouring in from all over the country. Money, yes, but also books, clothes, and offers of volunteer time from retired educators who wanted to help. Beatriz Santos was sentenced to 8 years in prison for kidnapping, false imprisonment, document forgery, and embezzlement. During the trial, She tried to argue that her actions were a misguided attempt to teach a lesson about values, but the prosecution presented evidence of premeditation and cruelty that made her defense untenable. Raphael attended the trial, not for revenge, but for closure, and when invited to make a victim impact statement, he spoke directly to Beatrice. "You didn't just take 2 months of my daughter's life. You took her sense of security, her ability to trust, the childhood she will never fully recover. But you also taught me the most important lesson, that neglect and abandonment come in many forms, and I was guilty of it long before you acted. So I don't thank you, but I acknowledge that the destruction you caused forced me to change in ways I never would have otherwise. I hope you use the time you have to understand the gravity of what you did." Beatrice cried, but Raphael felt neither satisfaction nor pity, only a void where anger used to be. On a Saturday afternoon, 6 months after their reunion, Raphael and Sophia did something they had been putting off, but knew they needed to do. They went back to the square where he had found her. It didn't seem as threatening in the daylight, just another small, neglected square among thousands in São Paulo, with patchy grass, a streetlight that still flickered intermittently, and trash accumulated in the corners. But there was something new. A small community library installed by the Institute, a brightly painted wooden box with free books that anyone could take or trade. A simple plaque was affixed to it. Here, a 9-year-old girl taught her father that love is proven with presence, not presence. Take a book, leave a book. Keep teaching. Sophia read the plaque aloud, her fingers tracing the engraved words, and asked, "Do you think Mum would be happy with what we're doing?" Raphael knelt beside her, looking not at the plaque, but at his daughter's face, a face that bore the indelible mark of the 2 months she had survived alone, but which also carried something new: hope. "Your mother told me before she died not to let work steal you from me. I broke that promise in the worst possible way, but I hope she's watching now and seeing that I'm trying to fix it. Not just with you, but with all the children we're helping. She always believed that education and love could change the world. The Institute is that, you doing this. It's her legacy continuing through you." Sophia thought for a moment, then took his hand, a gesture that was still rare, still significant every time it happened. "Daddy, can I tell you a secret?" Raphael nodded. "When I was on the streets, every night before I fell asleep, I would read a little bit of The Little Prince and imagine you would come find me. Even when I was really scared, even when I was hungry, I kept imagining it. And you came. It took a long time, but you came." Raphael felt tears burn his eyes, but he didn't hold them back. He had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that letting Sophia see his emotions was part of being a present father. "And I will be here every day for the rest of my life, for the big things and the small things, on the easy days and the hard days. I promise." Sophia looked at the square one more time, at the streetlight that had illuminated her impromptu night classes, at the ground where she had sat teaching children as lost as she was. "Sometimes I'm glad it happened," she said in a low voice. "Not the way it happened, not the bad parts, but if it hadn't happened, maybe you never would have stopped working so much. Maybe we never would have started the Institute. Maybe those 8 kids would still be on the street with no one teaching them, so maybe it had a purpose, you know." Raphael didn't know if he fully agreed. The cost had been too high, the trauma too deep, but he understood what she was trying to do. Find meaning in suffering, transform tragedy into purpose. They returned home in the late afternoon, taking the subway instead of the car with the driver because Sophia liked to watch people, to make up stories about where they were going. In the apartment, Raphael prepared dinner, pasta with tomato sauce. Nothing fancy, but made with attention, while Sophia did her homework at the kitchen table, and there was a normality to this routine that was more precious than any luxury he could buy. After dinner, they sat on the sofa, and Raphael picked up the book they were reading together, Not the Little Prince, which Sophia still couldn't read without too much emotion, but The Chronicles of Narnia, which Laura had also loved. He read a chapter aloud, Sophia leaning against his shoulder, and in the middle of the reading, she fell asleep, just like that, not from boredom, but from safety, from the finally recovered ability to relax completely in his presence. Raphael kept reading, even after she fell asleep, whispering the words just to himself, and when he finished the chapter, he carefully carried Sophia to her room, placed her in bed without waking her, and covered her with the blanket she had chosen, blue with stars, similar to the pajamas Laura had bought. He stood there for a few minutes just watching her, her gentle breathing, her relaxed hands, the peaceful face that in sleep looked years younger than when she was awake. "You saved me, Sophia," he whispered. "I didn't rescue you. You brought me back to life. You taught me what really matters. And I will spend every day I have left trying to be worthy of that gift." He kissed her forehead gently and left the room, leaving the door ajar with the hallway light streaming in, just as she preferred since she came back. In the living room, Raphael opened his laptop not to work, but to review photos from the Institute that week. Children reading in a circle as Sophia used to do in the square, art classes where little ones painted their stories on canvases, a community garden they were planting out back. There was one particular photo that made him stop. Sophia, her back to the camera, looking at a group of younger children she was teaching. The resemblance to that night in the square was undeniable, but the context was completely different. It wasn't desperate survival, it was a choice. It wasn't abandonment, it was community. It wasn't an end, it was a new beginning. He saved the photo and sent it to his own mother with a message. "She's just like Laura, Mom. Strong in the right way." The reply came immediately. "And you are finally being the father you always had the potential to be. I'm proud of you both." 6 months turned into a year, and the Sophia Reads Institute was operating at full capacity with 50 resident children and a meal program that served another 200 from the community daily. Raphael had recruited a competent executive director to manage daily operations, allowing him to focus on the strategic side while still having time for Sophia. She was now 10 and a half, in her final year of elementary school, getting excellent grades, but more importantly, making friends, laughing at recess, participating in school plays, living the life a child should live. Her therapist reported significant progress, though she warned that trauma of that level leaves permanent marks that Sophia would carry into adulthood. But, the therapist added, she has extraordinary resilience and a solid support system now. She's going to be okay. You both are going to be okay. Their story didn't have a fairy tale ending, because real life doesn't work that way. There were setbacks, arguments, moments when Sophia tested limits in ways that left Raphael exhausted and confused. Family therapy sessions where painful truths were spoken that neither of them wanted to hear. There were nights when Raphael doubted if he was doing the right thing, if he could be the father Sophia needed, if money and institutions could ever truly make up for 2 months of abandonment. But there were also mornings when Sophia would walk into the kitchen yawning and say, "Good morning, Daddy," as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Afternoons at the Institute where he would watch her teach a younger child to read with infinite patience. Spontaneous moments where she would hug him for no reason and whisper, "I love you," as if rediscovering that it was safe to love. And in those moments, Raphael knew they weren't just surviving the trauma. They were genuinely healing from it together, one day at a time. On the night of the Institute's 1-year anniversary, there was a small celebration with all the children, the staff, and some donors and volunteers. Sophia, now the project's unofficial spokesperson, gave a short speech that Raphael hadn't known she had prepared. "A year ago, I was in a square teaching a few kids to read because I didn't know what else to do. I was lost and scared, But I had these books my mom gave me, and I thought if I could teach someone, maybe it wasn't all useless. My dad found me in that square, and I thought he would just take me away and everything would go back to how it was before. But he did something better. He didn't just save me, he saved all the other kids too. He listened when I said I couldn't abandon my friends. This institute exists because my dad finally understood that love isn't about giving expensive presents or living in beautiful places. Love is about showing up, about being present, about building places where everyone matters. So thank you, Dad, for finding me, for listening, for changing. Mom would be proud of us. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and Raphael had to step out for a moment to compose himself because the pride and pain and love were too complex to process all at once in public. When he returned, Sophia was surrounded by the younger children from the institute who saw her as a hero, a big sister, a teacher, the exact same role she had involuntarily taken on in that square, but now in a safe context where a child shouldn't have to be a hero, but where her kindness could flourish without being burdened by survival. Raphael took a mental picture of this scene. His daughter, a survivor, an educator, a leader, laughing in the center of a community she had helped create. This was real wealth. This was true success. This was the legacy that mattered. That night, after everyone had gone home, and Raphael and Sophia arrived at their own, exhausted but happy, they sat on the sofa, and Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, as had become her habit. "Daddy, do you think there will be a day when this doesn't hurt anymore? When I don't remember the bad parts?" Raphael thought carefully before answering because she deserved honesty, not empty platitudes. "I don't know if the pain ever completely disappears. I still miss your mom every day, even 3 years later, but the pain changes. It gets softer, and the good memories start to become stronger than the bad ones. You'll carry what happened with you, but it won't define you. You are so much more than those 2 months. You're the girl who taught kids to read in a square. You're the daughter who taught me how to be a real father. You're the person who is changing lives right now. That's who you are." Sophia was silent, absorbing his words, then whispered, "I still dream I'm back in the square sometimes. But now when I wake up, you're here, and that makes all the difference. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what truly matters." Raphael built a technology empire valued at billions, closed deals that changed entire industries, and was on the cover of business magazines as a visionary entrepreneur. But he almost lost his kingdom, not the figurative one of companies and money, but the real one, his daughter, his family, his purpose. Sophia lived on the streets of São Paulo, slept on sidewalks, went hungry, and survived what no child should ever have to. But she never lost her humanity, her kindness, her conviction that education and gentleness mattered even when everything else was crumbling. And when these two broken hearts, a father who had forgotten how to love, and a daughter who thought she was no longer loved, found each other again in a square lit by a faulty streetlight, they didn't just save each other. They rebuilt each other, piece by piece, day by day, through mistakes and successes, setbacks and progress. True love isn't about perfection, about never making mistakes or never hurting the ones we love. True love is about showing up after you fail, about rebuilding after you destroy, about committing to presence even when it's uncomfortable and inconvenient. It's about turning tragedy into purpose, pain into growth, isolation into community. It's about a father on his knees on a dirty sidewalk begging for forgiveness, and a daughter who decides day after day to grant that forgiveness, not because she has forgotten, but because she chooses to believe in new beginnings. It's about a community library in an abandoned square, about an institute that transforms lives, about a simple dinner of pasta with sauce shared at a kitchen table. It's about whispering, "I love you," and knowing, truly knowing, that those words are backed by actions that prove their truth. 3 years after that night in the square, on an ordinary Saturday in April, Raphael and Sophia went to the cemetery to visit Laura. They did this once a month, bringing flowers and stories to tell about everything that was happening. Sophia, now 12, was taller, more confident, her hair finally long again and tied back in a ponytail as she used to wear it when she was younger. "Hi, Mom," she began as always, sitting on the grass near the simple headstone Raphael had chosen. "The Institute is doing great. We have 80 kids now. I still teach reading on Saturdays because I like it. Dad said that when I grow up, I can work there if I want, or I can do anything else. He says he just wants me to be happy, and I think I'm getting there, you know? Happy. Not every day, but most days. I still remember the bad days, but they don't scare me like they used to. Dad takes care of me. For real now. You'd be happy to see it." Raphael placed a hand on her shoulder, and together they sat there for a while, not needing to fill the silence with words, because their presence was enough. As they were leaving, Sophia took his hand. At 12, she didn't do this as often. Approaching adolescence made physical affection more complicated, and said, "Dad, thank you." He looked at her, surprised. "For what?" She shrugged. "For not giving up on me. For looking for me, for changing, for building that institute that helps so many kids, for being here just... Thank you." Raphael squeezed her hand, his throat too tight to reply immediately, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out hoarse but steady. "You don't have to thank me for things that are my job, but I accept it, and I thank you too, for giving me a chance to fix things, for not giving up on me even when you had every reason to. We saved each other, Soso, and we'll keep doing that for the rest of our lives." She smiled, that smile that was exactly like Laura's, that lit up everything around her, and replied, "Deal."